Hi, everyone. Give it just another second here. All right, well, welcome to CNS Connect Webinar Series. My name is Amy Smith, and I am the Director of Certifications for the BCNS and the ANA. And today I am joined by Megan Barnett, who is going to share her expertise on why you need a big win before your follow-up appointment. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that during the presentation, and we can make sure we ask Megan those as they feel appropriate. If you are a CNS, you're going to earn a CEU for today's webinar, so I will put a survey in the chat towards the end. Just make sure you complete that to get your certificate for your CE, and that will be in category number 5, which is professional development, and there is a 10 CEU credit limit per recertification period on that category. So let me introduce our speaker. So Megan's joining us again she has done one prior webinar and then has a couple more coming up after this. Megan is an experienced functional medicine provider, a certified nutrition specialist, a research writer, public speaker, and educator with over 10 years in the field of nutrition science and functional medicine. She is the co-owner of BioLounge, a functional medicine clinic in Portland, Oregon, co-founder and product developer of Florosophy organic soluble fiber blends. And in her clinical practice, Megan works with patients across the country, identifying and resolving underlying nutrition, infectious and inflammatory triggers, leading to the reversal of chronic and systemic symptoms while promoting health and longevity. She combines an extensive health intake alongside comprehensive laboratory testing and in-depth patient education to improve immune function, reduce inflammatory factors, optimize metabolic function, and reverse symptoms and disease. She is also co-developer of the BioLounge Clinical Immersion Program, which is a 12-week course built to bridge a gap between education and clinical practice for master's levels nutritionists while providing CNS supervision, community, and functional medicine experience. So thank you so much, Megan, for joining us. I will let you take over here. Let me stop sharing.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me. I will start sharing. See if this behaves itself. Okay, almost. Can everybody see that? Is that working, Amy?
Yep,
okay.
You're good.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm really excited to be back. It's just an awesome opportunity for me to interact with other CNSs or CNS candidates and talk about my biggest passion in life, which is working with patients in a functional nutrition clinic. And as Amy said, I own a clinic in Portland, Oregon, alongside Jeff Grimm, who's a nurse practitioner who did a fellowship in longevity and functional medicine early on in his career, and he's mentored me all the way through my career. So it's really fun to be able to mentor others as they're building their practice. One of the things that Ashley Kosh and Ashley's the other functional nutritionist in the clinic, have come to realize over the years of practicing is that there's a huge benefit in providing resources in the first appointment that give people some improvement in their health right off the bat. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is the benefit of just diving in really fast and having a big win with your client or patient prior to seeing them for the second appointment. Okay, so I'm not going to waste too much time saying what Amy already said. This is my background. And I have been thrilled to work alongside Ashley over the last couple of years to build out our clinical immersion program and CNS supervision. As probably many of you know, the interactions with clients and patients are really, really rewarding, but they take a special kind of energy. And the ability to work alongside colleagues is like a refuel, a reboot for me. And for many of us, I know this is a common conversation. The energy around talking through cases and being able to really dig into the research and evidence in our field is, for most of us, pretty energizing. So I'm glad that I get to balance my career in that way. Doing both keeps me balanced. So One of the things that has become apparent is that as a CNS, I feel we're fighting an uphill battle for recognition. And when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I have an undergrad in dietetics. And so there was a question, there was a fork in the road when I finished that bachelor's degree. Am I going to go on to do the RD or not? And when graduates ask me whether or not they should do their RD, I waver quite a bit because RD is recognized. There's already a definition. When somebody hears, oh, you're an RD, they go, oh, yeah, I kind of know what that is, right? And as a CNS, I feel we're still building that reputation. We're still building that awareness. What are we? What do we do? Most people that come into the clinic to see Ashley and I say, oh, you're a nutritionist. I brought my food log. That's very, very small percentage of what she and I do, right? So being in a position where consumers don't recognize necessarily what a CNS means gives us the opportunity to present ourselves, our expertise, our education in a way that brings awareness to the board certification, so they go and refer people to us, and those people understand what a CNS is, and then we get to be part of the growth of this field and the certification, which I believe in. Second to that, providers don't know what we do yet, not across the board. And so when I have somebody refer a patient to me, a conventional MD refer a patient to me, that's a really exciting moment, right? It's like, oh, they're starting to pick up on what we do. So our ability to have a big win quickly is a way to reinforce our education, our expertise, and our capability, really. And that will build awareness around what we do. We are knowledgeable educators. So to me, there's a difference between being knowledgeable and being an educator. And I feel our opportunity with patients and clients is to pass on useful education. We have advanced understanding of biochemical pathways. We have deeper understanding around the system connections throughout the body, right? We're not saying, oh, the heart is separate from the brain and the liver, and that we understand how these things interact with each other and integrate in a whole systems approach. And we can bring that knowledge to our clients. Most of us have more opportunity to spend time with clients. So we're not often dealing with a 5-minute or a 10-minute appointment. We may have 45 minutes or an hour, 75 minutes, even 90 minutes. For Ashley and I, we use 90 minutes for our lab reviews. So there's an opportunity to really explain to the client how their symptoms, their health experience is connected to everything else and where we may have opportunity to improve upon it. And most of us received education around motivational interviewing, and we come to this field with curiosity and perseverance. So when you add all of those things together, there's this ripe opportunity for us to take advantage of those first interactions with clients to start to build this trust and to build our reputation. One of the reasons that I feel compelled to dive in with my clients in the first appointment is because when they experience a benefit from a small amount of advice I give them before they come back to see me, when they come back for that first follow-up, they have built rapport and trust just because they had one benefit or two benefits that came out of that initial suggestion or intervention that I shared with them. The way that I go about establishing what are we going to do, of all the things that somebody walks into our clinic concerned about, how are we going to decide what we want to address in that first appointment? So I work to identify their priorities. One of the biggest things I found to be a benefit is to say, what is your biggest priority? And if you could wave a magic wand and change 3 things today, what would they be? And it helps me start to organize where we can make the biggest impact. With that in mind, then I have to review my toolbox, because I can't necessarily improve upon their biggest priority. I have to think, is that something where I really have some tools, or is it something where I'd be taking a jump that's a little too far, because I want that success between now and when I see them next. Then it's asking them, do you want to jump in now? Oftentimes we're sending people out for testing. We're doing some sort of additional investigation after that first appointment. So there are times when the patient says, no, I want to wait for the results. But generally speaking, if they're uncomfortable or they're experiencing symptoms that are really impacting their life, and I offer them, do you want to dive in now? It's an experiment. I can give you some tools. Then they are agreeable to that and excited about it. I found it very important to educate them around why. So let's say that somebody comes in and they have a host of issues, but one of the biggest things that impacts their daily life is constipation. It's pretty common these days, and it's something we see really regularly. So I'm not going to say, well, go home and take dairy out of your diet and try magnesium citrate. Bye. I'm going to say, okay, let's talk about what may be behind this constipation. And we're going to try to resolve it in the short term so you're more comfortable, while digging into maybe the root cause as we go along with better testing. And then tell them what's going on in the colon, what's going on from an inflammation perspective. What does magnesium citrate even do if we're going to use that? Why is it effective, right? And then I want to set expectations. I don't want them to leave thinking that because I gave them some tips that they are going to have a full resolution of all their symptoms in the next 2 weeks, right? So what are the expectations of what I would expect to improve if the intervention's working? And if it's not working, what would we expect? And then stay in touch with me, right? And then I want to give them a very simple protocol. So sometimes I'm tempted, because I want people to feel better quickly, to give them a lot of different things to fix a lot of different problems. Because you know how when you're starting that relationship, your brain's already ticking. You're already thinking, geez, I know how to help their sleep. I know how to help their poop. I know how to help their energy, right? But what we want is to figure out the biggest concern they have and start to intervene with some simple tools we have for that. Because again, we want them to have benefits. We're building trust with them. But the risk we have if we go too hard, too fast without additional data is that they may not have benefits. And then they felt like you've sold them $200 worth of supplements, nothing got better, and they think you're a quack, right? So we really want to be effective and moderate in our interventions so we can confidently improve upon something that's really important to them. In our clinic, there are certain symptoms we feel pretty confident about. So I recommend making a list of symptoms you feel really confident about. What do you have in your toolbox? Some of the most common complaints we hear from patients and clients are that they're experiencing acid reflux or heartburn, PMS, even into, well, whether we're dealing with younger girls or we're dealing all the way into perimenopause, the symptoms around hormone imbalance, probably a better way for me to put that. Pain and inflammation, poor sleep quality, poop problems, which go, many directions, stress response, and afternoon fatigue. So I thought that I would review some of the interventions that we use for these common complaints. You may have your own tools in the toolbox. So what I would love is to hear if you have different tools that you found are really, really consistently effective with your clients that I haven't thought of yet. So let's run through some of these. Okay, so insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to go back asleep, struggling to fall asleep. We have a lot of people that complain about sleep problems because they feel allergic when they get into bed. They start to feel stuffy and they struggle to breathe well. One thing I didn't write in here is having to pee in the middle of the night multiple times. That's another thing that we have some tools for. But poor sleep is something that oftentimes before we dive into a litany of testing or other investigation, we provide some simple tips for, okay? So we want to discuss sleep hygiene. What's the temperature of your room? What do you do before bed? Do you stare at your phone and watch, horror movies? Are you working until late at night? Those sorts of things. We're going to give them some simple tips if they don't already know of these interventions, and also ask about how realistic it is. Some people, let's say they have little kids and they're getting their kids to bed. This is something I hear really regularly. And then I have 45 minutes to myself, and I sit on the couch and I have a glass of wine and I watch TV with my spouse. That's a conversation in our clinic that goes something like this. Is that something that you're interested in changing? And oftentimes the answer is no. So we're not going to do anything about that, but we are going to educate on maybe what alcohol does to the body in the middle of the night and why it can cause you to wake up at 1 a.m. every single night, right? We often send people out of the clinic with a recommendation that they find dust mite covers. Dust mites are one of the most common allergies that we see associated with the complaint that when they get into bed, they feel stuffy, and they're stuffiest when they wake up in the morning, and then it gets better throughout the day. So we found this to be really helpful for those complaints, and that can improve upon sleep quality just in and of itself. Sometimes we are advising to go get a sleep study right away. So this is for people that say, yes, I wake up in the middle of the night doing that. Or my husband says that I snore and then I stop breathing. We're not even going to mess with that. I'm not going to give somebody melatonin when they've got sleep apnea or they sound like they have sleep apnea, right? But I'm going to explain it to them and ask them to pursue sleep study with their primary care physician. I'm always amazed at how many people say to me, I don't want to take melatonin because I don't want to have an addiction. And I like to do some education around that hormone and how it works in our body and how it's interrupted by our modern way of living and the safety studies around that. So just using something like melatonin can be really helpful. One of the supplements we also will send people out of the clinic with after the first appointment, if they're complaining about sleep issues, is Cortisol Manager by Integrative Therapeutics. I think there's probably countless supplements that are helpful for reducing cortisol before bed. This just happens to be the one we use. I like it because of the phosphatidylserine. I find that people tend to really have a benefit from that specific supplement if they report that stress is their biggest concern with falling asleep. The mind goes crazy before they go to sleep. And then with those people, we also often will recommend something like Headspace or Calm to give them a little meditation routine as they're falling asleep at night. I didn't put it on this because it depends on what type of access you have to other providers. But for women between the ages of 35 and basically menopause, it's extremely common for them to report anxiety and insomnia that is likely tied to hormone imbalance. And so those are patients that we're often going to send out to either meet with their gynecologist about using oral progesterone, or they're going to be scheduled with one of our providers for that reason. And we do a lot of education around that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone and how it affects anxiety and insomnia. And I love that fix because it tends to help with a lot of the hormone symptoms, but really achieving sleep when you're at that stage of your life as a female is like it's magic. So that's a great one as well if you have access to providers that are prescribers for progesterone and are paying attention to the research on that. Personally, this is my favorite. As Amy said, I have a line of soluble fiber called Fluorosophy. It was born out of the number of complaints I had from clients that they had poop problems. And I had so many people that had constipation that came to me and said, but I can't take soluble fiber because it makes me worse, or psyllium really binds me up. And so I ended up developing my own for that reason, a line of different soluble fibers that address different pooping problems. But when people would call me years ago and they would say, I'm so constipated, I have a bowel movement every 3 to 4 days, I wouldn't even schedule an appointment with them yet. I wouldn't charge them. I would say, just try this one intervention and tell me how it goes. And the intervention was take dairy, gluten, and sugar out of your diet for 2 weeks, drink 90 ounces of water with electrolytes, eat 2 tablespoons of chia per day, and if you need to, begin to titrate up magnesium citrate before bed. My experience was that if we could get them pooping, it was a lot easier to keep them pooping. Years ago, before I went into this field, I was a general contractor, and so a lot of the metaphors in my world happen to be like things like plumbing and electrical work. But I always tell people they have to unclog the pipes, and then we can start working on the other things that might be going on. But resolving or improving constipation or diarrhea for people, especially diarrhea with urgency, is life-changing. So we have tools that while we're trying to figure out what's at the root of it, we can really improve upon those symptoms. So let's say that they're constipated. I might be using the regimen I just told you. Typically now I do that with out chia. I use one of my soluble fibers. We will potentially add a probiotic to that depending on what their history is. But I definitely have them on an anti-inflammatory diet right out of the gate. And that's because I have found that it's one of the most effective longer term things we can do to improve upon their inflammatory responses throughout the entire GI tract. And it tends to give us a longer benefit than just having to constantly use something like magnesium citrate. But we will likely use a probiotic. Depending on their history, if it's diarrhea, we're going to probably use berberine to help knock some of the microbes down. 9.9 times out of 10, that might be an exaggeration, but I'm pretty close. It's a parasite. And so we'll do parasitic testing, but it takes a while to get those results back. I think the other 0.1% of the time, we see it as fat malabsorption. And so in that case, when we start to use digestive enzymes that have ox, bile, and pancreatic enzymes in them, we'll start to see that benefit along with the fluorosophy fiber. And the reason we use that is because it has some helpful binding fibers in the one that's meant for diarrhea. So if we can get them digesting fat, and while we're waiting to do testing for microbes and infections, we can get them on some fiber. It tends to reverse the urgency at the very least, and lessen the number of times they're going to the bathroom. One of the things that I'll mention about constipation is that oftentimes the lining of the colon has become disrupted or inflamed to the point where it doesn't move water in and out properly. And so the electrolytes are extremely helpful for charging the water and helping to move the right amount in and the right amount out. The same can be said for the soluble fiber. It's like a sponge. So it can make stool more solid, and it can make it more loose because it's going to hold water. So we're using some combination of this list to help people improve upon their bowel movements before we identify the root cause of what's going on.
Megan, there was a question. Would you repeat your constipation protocol?
Sure. Let me repeat this. And also what I'll say about it is it's super easy for little kids too. And that's what I like about this across the board. And typically I'll tell people with the 2 tablespoons of chia pudding, or chia, which I typically tell them to do is chia pudding. Sometimes parents have reported to me when it's kids that they will put it into smoothies or into their yogurt or something like that. I will ask them to take gluten, dairy, and sugar out of their diet. Very commonly, constipation is caused by an overgrowth of yeast in the gastrointestinal tract. And when we remove the sugar, the yeast starts to die down a little bit, and we can get people pooping on their own again. So 2 tablespoons chia pudding, taking the inflammatory foods out. I'm going to tell them to have electrolytes a couple times a day and about 90 ounces of water. Now that's for an adult. If you're dealing with a kiddo, you're going to probably reduce that amount of water. It's a little too much, right? But we're going to give them electrolytes 2 to 3 times a day. I tell people you can pick up, noon tabs at the grocery store. You can use trace minerals. I don't really care. Whatever's going to get it in without sugar. Some people like Element, the one that's spelled LMNT. And then the last thing is magnesium citrate. So I have found personally that magnesium citrate is the best form of magnesium for not absorbing into the body, but actually being osmotic and pulling the water into the colon. I will normally have people start with 300 milligrams on night one and increase by 150 milligrams every night until they've achieved a morning bowel movement that's hopefully not too loose. And you can safely go up to 900 milligrams or so. Because again, it's not absorbing, so it's pulling water into the colon. Some people, for kids, like to use Calm. What I do want to mention about Calm is that is magnesium carbonate. I've had a lot of people use Calm and they get pretty gaseous, very bloaty. That's because it's carbonate. It does work for having a bowel movement for sure, but there tends to be more gas associated with it. So if they're able to use citrate, I've just had people have better results without the side effects. Was that helpful?
Yeah, you actually answered the other question too, which was about the electrolytes. So,
Oh, good. Okay, good. Okay, then I'll keep going. Well, who hasn't had a client that has a high stress response these days? This is pretty much everybody that we see. So this is one that I really like to gauge how big of an impact the client feels it's making on their health. We have a lot of stressed out people that feel like this is just kind of my way of life and I have good skills and tools to deal with it and it's not impacting how I feel. Now, later we might find out it's hugely impacting how they feel, but it's not their perception at the beginning. But we have plenty of people that say like, this is taking me out. This is killing me and I need to figure something out. So we like to go through a menu of things they may already be doing and things that they may be willing to start practicing. So we often use the Andrew Weil, I think it's 378 or 478 breathing. I tend to send the link to people. That is a super simple 4 reps with that cadence of breathing that people can do anytime throughout the day, and it feels achievable for most people. And there's good research around that with regards to stress and anxiety. If people are feeling really activated in the morning, and we see a lot of this with people that don't lose weight, their body just will not shed weight no matter what they do. We're going to put them typically on this combination of integrative therapeutics with HPA Adapt and Cortisol Manager. The HPA Adapt doesn't have the phosphatidylserine, so it's good for the morning because it's not going to tank your cortisol. It's more adaptogenic. But then use the Cortisol Manager in the evening. Again, something like Headspace, if they're interested in doing guided meditation, can be helpful. A low sugar diet or even a low carb diet. This is a big one. And the reason is that oftentimes people that are experiencing high levels of anxiety and stress, and they will also typically report in this context that they have attention issues and they struggle to focus. There can be a yeast component to that, and that is because overgrowth of yeast increases histamine, and that overproduction of histamine in the brain triggers the release of acetylcholine from the as a neurotransmitter that is an activator. So when I have somebody that's really reporting to me high stress, high anxiety, problems focusing, a lot of overwhelm, I'm thinking we need to put you, if you're willing, on something like a Whole30, so we can start to address the microbiome and reduce anxiety. Ashley and I have an anti-yeast diet that is quite low carb, and we send that out to people, and we'll send that out after the first visit with recipes if we're really concerned that that is a factor. Sleep quality, this goes back to when you're having that initial consultation with somebody. Is your stress because you're not getting good sleep? You're not energized, you can't get through the day. And then exercise. So if they're not exercising, getting them into at least explaining the connection between the exercise and stress response. Something I didn't put on here that I was just thinking about this morning is oftentimes we'll see once we get labs back with these people that they have very high homocysteine. They have a high MCV, so we're thinking about their B vitamins, and if they are low in some of these Bs or if they don't methylate well, it's not uncommon for me to send them out the door with K-Pax, which is I don't work for Integrative Therapeutics. We just really like their products a lot. We have a handful of different brands that we rely on, but Integrative does have some great products. So we typically will give them K-Pax, their multivitamin that's really high in B vitamins, and it's aimed at the mitochondria. And I have found that if people feel more energy, oftentimes their stress goes down because they are capable of achieving more during the day. Okay. This is a controversial one, but one that we have some pretty good results with. So we have a lot of people that come in and have acid reflux, heartburn symptoms, GERD, whatever their diagnosis is. These are people that have consistently been on PPIs in many cases, and they are eating just the average American diet. So my brain tends to start thinking about what might be fermenting in their small intestine, causing gas to build up, pressing up on the stomach, and causing acid to move back into the esophagus. If that is congruent with what they're telling me, then I may start to add digestive enzymes with hydrochloric acid on top of their PPI between the first and second visit. Now, this is as long as they don't have Barrett's. We're not concerned about long-term damage. Often I require that they've had an endoscopy and we've ruled out a hiatal hernia. So there's some context around this. But if they are a good candidate, I'm going to put them on digestive enzymes and I'm going to put them on a low-carb diet right off the bat. What a low-carb diet's going to do is reduce the food source to those microbes that are in the small intestine fermenting and creating that gas and pressure that push up on the stomach, forcing the acid back into the esophagus. I've also seen an anti-inflammatory diet. So I should caveat that we do a lot of food sensitivity testing using Vibrant Labs because we've found their sensitivity and specificity to be so good. But right off the bat, if they're pretty miserable and I take them off of the obvious food sensitivities of gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, corn, and sugar, if they're willing for a couple of weeks, the irritation to the lining of the small intestine can calm down. And I've seen that in and of itself reverse heartburn or GERD. And then based on other symptoms, we may just go with a motility activator like DGL. So one of or more of these interventions, it's very common for us to use between the first and second appointment when we're waiting on test results to try to give them some relief. The other thing it does for us, if one of these interventions works, is it gives us a clue about what is behind the symptom. And with the rate of people in this country that have reflux and are on PPIs, we see this, if not daily, multiple times a week. And so we have a lot of experience under our belts around figuring out, what may be going on before we just jump into one of these interventions. But oftentimes with years of PPI use, the acidity in their stomach is so low, the pH is so high, so the acidity is so low that they're really not even digesting their food, and it's just causing things to be stagnant in the stomach. And oftentimes you're going to see that B12 levels are low because they're not producing intrinsic factor and they're having other issues associated with that as well. Any questions about that? Because I know that's like I said, that's kind of a controversial topic. Okay. So I feel like we have a secret weapon for this. This is like my daughter's 15 years old and I want to scream this from the rooftops to all of her friends. So PMS can happen at any age through childbearing years. Oftentimes we don't get our hands on these women until they're in their 40s and they're starting to experience some pretty nasty perimenopause symptoms. And when we talk about history, we hear, man, they have been suffering their whole adult lives, adolescence and beyond. These are often the people that are put on birth control in high school just to manage their symptoms of PMS and heavy bleeding, or they say, oh my gosh, I had to miss school, on the first day of my period because I was so miserable. And then fast forward to perimenopause and it's like, everybody's off the rails because their hormones were never regulated. So we have really good research around eliminating sugar and dairy. And dairy can be really inflammatory for people, but it's also rich with hormones, right? Like it's meant to feed babies. So, baby cows. So it's got growth hormone and other things that are stimulating our own hormones. And then sugar is another, any refined sugar can interrupt hormone balance. So oftentimes when people are pretty miserable, they're totally happy to make these changes. They eliminate sugar and get rid of dairy. But really, here's our secret weapon. Axis Endo. And this is a Metagenics product. If you don't already know about it, check it out. It is intense and amazing. That said, it's intense. So this is a powder supplement that has, it's kind of like a multivitamin that specifically targets liver detoxification of estrogen. Now, when your liver detoxifies estrogen, it detoxifies other things too. So it's a great detoxifier, but it not only has this constellation of nutrients that support the liver, it has a high amount of calcium D-glucarate, 1.5 grams if you're taking the full dose. It's so effective that I had to stop putting people on the full dose because it would cause them to have such a massive estrogen detox that they would get migraine and outbreaks of acne and all sorts of things if we went too fast. So I start people on a quarter dose, which is a half of a scoop for a week. And then they go to 1 scoop for a week. And then they move to 2 scoops for a week. This is probably our most effective regulator of hormones for women of every age until menopause, when we're not as worried about clearing estrogen. That said, if a person has a family history of hormone positive breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and you look at their history and you see, okay, they had a lot of these symptoms. This is not a bad idea for somebody postmenopausally to help them clear estrogen waste for a few months. And you'll often see this associated with people that are gaining a lot of weight or holding weight. Now, when you start to push somebody's estrogen clearance, it doesn't automatically leave the body. It has to be bound to soluble fiber in the small intestine. So estrogen is bound to bile. Bile is then secreted into the small intestine to help you absorb fat. And if it doesn't bind to soluble fiber, then it gets reabsorbed. The bile is reabsorbed with the estrogen. So the way that we support PMS with these people, because oftentimes we are going to test and then we're not going to see them for a month. So we give them Axis Endo, and in our case, fluoroscopy, because that's obviously the soluble fiber we use at our clinic. And we ask them to titrate up to that full dose. So they start then with a teaspoon of fluoroscopy first week, 2 teaspoons, second week, 3 teaspoons, the next week, tablespoon, because that's going to bind to the estrogen, draw it into the colon, and they're going to pass it in their stool. Once you've got them upregulated, generally it takes 2 months to fully clear estrogen to the point where they're asymptomatic. That's consistently what we see. Some people are not going to take that supplement. It's a powder. It tastes like mango-ish. And in that case, we will put them on something like K-Pax, the multivitamin that has the methylated Bs and calcium D-glucarate with a probiotic, and then either get them on fluoroscopy or get them eating a lot of soluble fiber in beans and lentils. Magnesium right before their cycle for a week before, and that's not magnesium citrate because we want them to absorb it. So we tend to use tri-magnesium, which again is integrative. We will use 150 to 300 milligrams for the week before their period. That can be extremely beneficial for our symptoms around PMS. And then the paleo diet, again, because that's reducing carbohydrates, keeping blood sugar balanced throughout the month. Now, one thing I didn't say, and you're not going to know this until you have testing unless they bring labs to their first visit. If you see a person that has low homocysteine, it's 6 or under, and they're complaining about PMS, methylated B vitamins will push them the wrong direction. And in that case, you actually want to use N-acetylcysteine because they're hypermethylators. And so you don't want to put them on something methylated if they're having hormone issues. So again, this product Axis Endo is just, I feel like everybody should know about it. It's just so effective. When I use it for teen girls though, like my daughter, we stay at half a dose because they're just, their bodies are smaller. So that's what we do with PMS between visits. Okay, and here's afternoon fatigue. This is a complaint from a lot of our patients, oftentimes because they're jacking themselves up on caffeine and refined carbs before lunch, and then they're struggling throughout the rest of the day. So we're going to ask them to reduce their morning caffeine if it sounds like they're overdoing it and they're falling off the cliff in the middle of the day. This is where I really assess what they're eating for breakfast and lunch. And if it sounds like they're getting blood sugar imbalance for breakfast and lunch, then we're going to talk about how to round that out with the proper amount of protein and fat and fiber. If you're really concerned, you may ask them to start on a continuous glucose monitor so they can see that data for themselves. They can see them spike and dip. You're going to look at B complex or a strong multivitamin like K-Pax at lunch, because again, that's going to revitalize their energy. One of the other things I see with people is they drink a lot of coffee in the morning and then they say, oh, but I drink plenty of water. And I said, right, but that water is dehydrating you. You basically drank a diuretic and then you're drinking water that's not charged with any electrolytes. And so your kidneys are just moving everything through. So in that case, I ask them to have electrolytes a couple times in the morning, 1 to 2 times before lunch. And then I ask them to walk at lunch or move. Sometimes I have people go in the bathroom at their office and do a couple of HIIT workouts, right? They're going to do some squats, they're going to do lunge jumps, something like that to get their circulation going. I didn't write this, but as I'm saying this, I am realizing we do have a fair amount of people that have sleep apnea. If they are complaining of snoring in that first visit, and they're complaining about afternoon fatigue, and there are any risk factors you're concerned about, this is another great opportunity to refer them out for a sleep study or to a sleep doctor, because they're going to feel that crash, and it's pretty severe in the afternoon if it's sleep apnea. Pain and inflammation. So this is one where we're going to put them on just a generalized anti-inflammatory diet if they're really uncomfortable. We're often going to be doing food sensitivity testing when somebody comes in with pain and inflammation systemically, because we know we can turn that dial down on inflammatory cytokines with a personalized diet. Therakermin or a nanoparticle curcumin. Therakermin is Integratis product. This has been shown in research, just recent research, that if you have them take 5 grams a day, it reduces inflammation almost equivalent to Advil. So depending on their level of discomfort, you can put them on a pretty high dose of curcumin. Again, it needs to be nanoparticle and help their inflammation just on its own, right? Without doing anything else. Trimagnesium, we're going to use that at night for people as a muscle relaxer, just right out of the gate. We don't have to do any testing for that. That can be really supportive, especially if the pain and inflammation tends to be more muscular versus joint or something else going on. And then we'll put them on quercetin. Right now we use BioClinic Naturals EMIQ, I think is what it's called. Because it's a really nice derivative of quercetin, really high power, if they're complaining of pain and inflammation associated with other histamine issues. And I don't know about all of you, but we're seeing a lot of mast cell activation throughout COVID and post-COVID. So that can be part of it. Okay. So wrapping this all up, I wanted to give you all an idea of some of the tools that we use to build that rapport and to improve upon a person's health situation while we're in the process of collecting data. But this is laying a foundation for partnership. One of the things I think we do well in our field is we are able to be on the same level with our clients. We can, they don't come to us feeling like, oh, we're intimidating and they, can't. The reports that people have oftentimes with their medical provider that they don't feel like they can have open conversations with them, or they feel like they are looked down upon or brushed off. I'm never going to say to somebody, what do you think? Your doctor Google. I like when people come into the clinic and they've already done their own research or they know a lot about their bodies. But this is an opportunity for you to identify their priorities. Make sure they know that their priorities are your priorities. Find out what their willingness is for change. Hopefully, if they're seeing you, they're already expecting that, right? They didn't come to you because they want a prescription written. Make it simple. So of all those options that I laid out with those different symptoms, I'm not going to do all of them. I'm going to find out what they're willing to do, and I'm going to make it extremely targeted. And then I want to tell them what to expect. So if this is working, you should expect to feel ... I want you to track your sleep quality. Maybe they're using an Aura, maybe they're using a Whoop, maybe they're just going to track with how they feel with energy throughout the day, or how many times they woke up to go pee, etc. And then let them know that whatever they learn in the time that they have between visits is going to inform you as you help them choose what they're going to do next, what their next steps are. So we always provide something that they take home, right? So that can be your recommendations written out about their supplement plan. You may send them home with a menu. You may send them home with a resource sheet with more information for them to learn about their condition or their symptoms. You definitely want them to have a tracking plan. And you may be providing referrals out to other providers if you're concerned. That would be very common in our clinic if there are things outside of our scope that we know that they need support around in order for their goals to be met, but we don't have the resources to do that. Off the top of my head, we do a lot of referring out for PT, pelvic floor PT, etc. Those are not tools we have here at our clinic, and we can't really get around it until they get those things done, just as an example. Okay, that's it. Questions, comments?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody has a question, you can also raise your hand and we can unmute you if you don't want to type everything in. And I'll put the CE survey in the chat while we're waiting to see if there's any questions. No questions?
No, if no questions, also, I just want to say that you're welcome to share my email. I don't know if that is already posted somewhere, but you're always welcome to reach out to me after the presentation if something pops into your mind, or if there's resources that I talked about here that you want to see. I'm happy to share them with you.
I'll put your email in the chat there.
Oh, it looks like we had some.
Okay. Oh, great. Judy said, great presentation. Leandro asked what symptoms you look at for Axis Endo.
Mm-hmm. So I have this saying, just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. Okay. When I talk to women about PMS or hormone-related symptoms, it's very common for them to say, well, I had all the normal stuff. I had breast pain, I had heavy bleeding, I had cramping, I had acne, I had headaches. I truly believe and have experienced that none of those things are normal. They're just common. And so when somebody is reporting that they either grew up with those symptoms, they currently have those symptoms, I'm immediately going to be thinking about that relationship between progesterone and estrogen in the last week prior to menstruation, when they should start to dip down together. And when progesterone's dipping down and estrogen is not dipping down, it's staying too high, that's when we see that presentation of all of those hormone-related symptoms before menstruation. That's not the only situation in which I would use Axis Endo, because again, I may see somebody that has a lot of detoxification issues. That's an awesome supplement for people that were exposed to a lot of toxins growing up. They have other things going on with detox pathways, but hormone-related symptoms, pretty much anything that I'm thinking, okay, we've got to clear the estrogen. You're not moving it out.
Wonderful. Okay, the next question is, do you use progesterone as a cream instead of oral? And then the second question is that with wild yam?
Yep, good question. So because of the way that our clinic functions, and because we have prescribers that are hormone experts that do a lot of compounded hormone replacement therapy, I do not get into any of it personally. What we tend to see is that women are thriving more on oral progesterone, okay, not progestin and all the other different forms, but oral progesterone more than they are with the cream. And I can't tell you why that is. My business partner probably could, but I don't know the reason. So we tend to refer out for oral progesterone, either 100 or 200 milligrams per night, but not when they're having their cycle. So depending on where they are in their hormone path, if they're still having normal periods, we have them just take it for the second half of the month. If their hormones are starting to get dysregulated because they're in perimenopause and that shift is happening, then we will have them take it throughout the entire month, except for when they're menstruating, because they tend to have better results. And then, yes, sometimes we are using wild yam, depending on what their other symptoms are. And sometimes we're not. We have found that oral progesterone often does the trick on its own and covers such a breadth of symptoms that, and it's safe and protective, that we have women on that for months, if not years.
Great. There's one more question in the chat. It said, as far as magnesium citrate, do you recommend taking at night?
Yes, definitely. Especially when, well, yes, I always do, but when the titration is happening, as women, well, I should say, as everybody is adjusting, definitely want to make sure that they are home and able to use the restroom as needed as they're figuring out what their dose is. I also have found that if people are taking out their food sensitivities or they're taking out inflammatory foods, oftentimes they'll find a dose of magnesium citrate, and as things calm down, they have to back that down, or they end up with really loose stool, which is obviously not the goal.
Great, thank you. Oh, nope, we got another one. How do you order from Vibrant Labs?
Sure. So Vibrant is national, and every area has a rep. We have accounts with Vibrant and also custom labs. So that's one of the things, if you haven't worked with Vibrant, that I like about them, is that you can make your own customized labs. So we've built the ones that we like to see, and they're great because, again, I can order labs all over the country, and they have relationships with phlebotomists all over the country. So it gives me the ability to work remotely with people. If you don't know who your rep is for the area, you should email me and I'll connect you with my rep, and they can connect you with your rep. So we can do it that way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think that is it. Thank you, Megan. This was wonderful.
Thanks again for having me.
And I was going to mention that your next webinar is coming up on September the 13th. So you and Ashley are going to be talking about how to review medical labs with nutrition in mind. Mm-hmm. So please use the link that I put in the chat if you want to get registered for that, if you have not already. Hold on, we got some late coming questions here. Mm-hmm. So can nutritionists have an account with Vibrant? I think the answer is yes, right? They allow CNSs to have
the answer is yes. I will tell you, like many labs, I was like grandfathered in from the beginning. I don't even know if they were thinking about what anybody's, professional background was. But typically they're going to go, what's your NPI? And you're going to say, I don't have necessarily an NPI, but I am a CNS. This is my, master's degree. Oftentimes they just say, okay, send us a picture of your master's degree or your board certification. That's the workaround through Vibrant. You just want to work with your local rep.
Perfect. All right, Leandro, I put the links back in the chat, so please let me know if you can't see them. Yana, I just put if you go to the webinar page, you can register on that site. And Megan's has the one coming up on the 13th. And then I think after that in October. Does that sound right? Yeah. So make sure you check out the webinar page and sign up. Even if you don't think you can attend live, if you register for the webinar, I always send the recording out the next day. So you'll have it even if you can't show up directly. Let me make sure that was it.
Amy, can I do one more shameless plug for our different programs that we offer through BioLounge? Okay. So just to reiterate, Ashley and I run a 12-week clinical immersion program twice a year. Our next one starts in September. This program goes through clinical therapeutic interventions and business planning, how to function in this world as a CNS and run your own business and interact with patients, but also how do you interpret labs and what are therapeutic approaches. It offers CNS CE. So if you already are a CNS, we think we have 42 credits of CE through that program. And then we also offer CNS supervision. And I believe we have 140 hours of supervision through that program. And then on top of that, I also provide weekly ongoing CNS supervision. So if that is something that you're still working towards, definitely reach out to me. And lastly, we have a clinical insider newsletter, and that is something we put out every few weeks, and we go through a case study on that every few weeks. And it's just kind of a fun way for us to share with you interventions that we're finding that seem to be working for our clients.
Yeah, that's a great newsletter. I saw that last week.
Thanks.
Awesome. So Yana, if you have any questions about the pricing or anything like that, please email Megan and she'll be happy to let you know the details on the program. Awesome. All right, Megan, thank you so much. And we will see you in a few weeks for the next webinar.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.